The moment Natalie Lancaster stepped into the sprawling gallery, she forgot about the ache in her feet from standing all day at the elementary school where she taught art to rowdy third graders. The new Contemporary Art Museum had finally opened its doors in downtown Chicago, and she had marked this date on her calendar months ago. She wove through the crowd of elegantly dressed patrons, clutching her modest clutch purse, feeling slightly out of place in her simple navy dress that had cost her a fraction of what most people here probably spent on their shoes. But none of that mattered when she stood before the first painting, a breathtaking abstract piece that seemed to capture the chaos and beauty of human emotion in swirls of crimson and gold. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" a deep voice said from beside her. Natalie turned to find a tall man standing close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and his dark hair was styled with just enough product to look effortlessly perfect. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, warm brown eyes that seemed genuinely interested in the painting, not just making small talk. "It is," she replied, trying not to feel self-conscious. "The way the artist uses color to convey grief transforming into hope, it's absolutely beautiful." The man's face lit up with surprise. "That's exactly it. Most people just see angry red strokes, but you see the whole narrative." "I teach art," Natalie explained, turning back to the painting. "So I spend a lot of time thinking about what artists are trying to communicate. Elementary school." She glanced at him, surprised. "How did you know?" "You have a small paint stain on your wrist," he said, gesturing gently. "The kind that comes from supervising young artists rather than creating in a controlled studio." Natalie laughed, looking down at the blue smudge she had missed when washing up. "Guilty. One of my students got a little enthusiastic with the tempera paint today." "I'm Dominic Vaughn," he said, extending his hand. "Natalie Lancaster." She shook his hand, noting the firm but gentle grip. They moved through the gallery together, and Natalie found herself completely absorbed in conversation with this stranger, who seemed to appreciate art as much as she did. He asked thoughtful questions about technique and meaning, and she found herself explaining concepts she usually reserved for her college friends who actually understood art theory. Dominic listened intently, his attention never wavering even when other guests walked by. "This one," Dominic said, stopping before a sculpture made of twisted metal and glass, "reminds me of the first time I saw a Giacometti piece in person. There's something about the fragility combined with the industrial materials." Natalie nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. The juxtaposition of strength and vulnerability. I've always wanted to take my students to see Giacometti's work, but field trip budgets being what they are." "That's a shame," Dominic said, and something in his tone suggested he genuinely meant it. "Kids should have access to art that challenges them." They wandered through 3 more rooms, discussing everything from Renaissance techniques to modern street art. Natalie couldn't remember the last time she had such an engaging conversation about her passion. Her friends were wonderful, but they didn't quite understand why she could spend hours analyzing brushstrokes or debating the merits of different artistic movements. When they reached the museum's cafe area, Dominic turned to her with what looked like nervous energy, though she couldn't imagine why such a confident man would be nervous. "I know this is forward, but would you like to have dinner with me?" "Not tonight," he added quickly. "I know this is sudden." "But maybe this weekend." Natalie's heart did a small flip. She had assumed this was just a pleasant conversation with a fellow art enthusiast, not anything more. Yes, I'd like that." Dominic's smile was genuine and warm. "Saturday. I know a place with terrible art on the walls, so we can have fun critiquing it together," she laughed. "That sounds perfect." They exchanged phone numbers, and as Natalie left the museum an hour later, she felt like she was floating. She texted her best friend Meyer immediately. "Just met someone at the museum opening, has actual opinions about post-impressionism, going to dinner Saturday." Maya's response was instantaneous. "Who is he? Tell me everything." Saturday arrived faster than Natalie expected. She changed outfits 4 times before settling on a burgundy dress that made her feel confident without trying too hard. Dominic picked her up at 7, and she was relieved to see he was dressed more casually than at the museum dark jeans, and a navy button-down that made his eyes stand out. The restaurant he chose was intimate and warm, with exposed brick walls and, as promised, some truly questionable abstract paintings that looked like they came from a hotel liquidation sale. See that one. Dominic pointed to a canvas covered in what appeared to be random geometric shapes in muddy colors. I think that's supposed to be a sunset, or a traffic jam, Natalie suggested, or possibly someone's attempt to paint a headache. They both laughed, and the ice was thoroughly broken. Over dinner, their conversation flowed effortlessly. Dominic asked about her students, and Natalie found herself telling stories about 8-year-olds discovering the magic of mixing colors and the chaos of glitter projects. "What about you?" Natalie asked as their entrees arrived. "What do you do when you're not attending museum openings?" Dominic hesitated for just a moment. "I work in manufacturing. It's not as interesting as teaching." "Manufacturing what?" "Industrial equipment, mostly. It's a lot of meetings and problem-solving." He said it in a way that suggested he didn't want to bore her with details, so Natalie didn't press. She appreciated that he seemed more interested in talking about art and life than his career. "You paint?" Dominic asked. "Or is teaching enough creative outlet?" "I paint," Natalie admitted. "Nothing spectacular. I have a tiny studio apartment, so I've converted a corner into my workspace. Mostly watercolors because they don't take up much room and the smell doesn't overwhelm the space." "I'd love to see your work sometime." The way he said it, Natalie believed him. This wasn't a line or an excuse to see her apartment. He genuinely wanted to see what she created. Their second date was a walk along the lakefront, followed by coffee at a small cafe that served the best lavender lattes Natalie had ever tasted. The third date was a trip to the Art Institute, where they spent 4 hours wandering through the collections. Dominic revealed that he had taken art history courses in college, which explained his deep knowledge. "Why didn't you pursue something in the arts?" Natalie asked as they stood before a Monet. "Family business," Dominic said simply. "My father built something and I was expected to continue it. I don't regret it, but I try to keep art in my life in other ways." By their 5th date, Natalie was falling hard. Dominic was thoughtful, funny, and treated her like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met. He remembered small details. She mentioned her favorite flower, which student was struggling with confidence, how she took her coffee. He opened doors and pulled out chairs but never made her feel anything less than his equal. There was just one thing that nagged at her. Dominic was always perfectly dressed, always picked nice restaurants, and he had mentioned having meetings in New York and Los Angeles as casually as someone might mention running to the grocery store. She got the sense that his family business was more significant than he let on, but she didn't know how to ask without seeming like she cared about money. 2 months into their relationship, Maya cornered Natalie at their weekly coffee meetup. "Okay, I have to ask, have you Googled him?" "What?" "No," Natalie said, feeling oddly defensive. "Why would I do that?" "Because you've been dating for 2 months and you still don't really know what he does for a living." Maya pulled out her phone. "What did you say his last name was?" "Vaughn." "But Maya, I don't want to." Maya's eyes went wide as she stared at her phone screen. "Natalie, oh my God, Natalie." "What?" Maya turned the phone around. The screen showed a Forbes article. Dominic Vaughn, CEO of Vaughn Industrial, announces new sustainability initiative. There was a photo of Dominic in a suit, looking serious and professional, standing in front of what appeared to be a massive factory. Natalie's stomach dropped. That can't be right. But as Maya scrolled, there were more articles. Dominic speaking at conferences. Dominic being interviewed about manufacturing innovations. An older article about him taking over as CEO of his late father's company at age 28, 5 years ago, and turning it into a multi-billion-dollar empire. He's a billionaire, Maya said slowly. Your sweet museum guy is a literal billionaire. Natalie felt nauseous. Why hadn't he told her? They had shared so much over the past 2 months, hopes, dreams, embarrassing stories from their childhoods, but he had let her believe he was just some guy who worked in manufacturing. When Dominic called that evening to confirm their plans for the weekend, Natalie's voice was tight. Can you come over? We need to talk. The concern in his voice was immediate. Of course, is everything okay? Just come over, please. Dominic arrived 20 minutes later, still in his work clothes, another expensive suit that she now realized probably cost thousands of dollars. He looked worried as she let him into her small apartment, his eyes scanning her face. What's wrong? He asked immediately. Natalie crossed her arms. Why didn't you tell me who you really are? Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like resignation. You looked me up. My friend did. Dominic, you're a billionaire. You run one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country. And you let me think you were just some guy who works in industrial equipment. I do work in industrial equipment, he said quietly. That part wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Natalie sat down on her second-hand couch, suddenly exhausted. Why didn't you tell me? Dominic sat beside her, careful to leave some space between them. Because of exactly this. Because the moment people know who I am, what I'm worth, everything changes. They see the money instead of me. So you thought lying was better. I didn't lie, he insisted. I just didn't volunteer information that would have changed how you saw me. Natalie, that night at the museum, you talked to me about art. You shared your passion and your knowledge, and you didn't care that I was wearing an expensive suit or that I had arrived in a car with a driver. You just cared about the paintings and the conversation. Do you know how rare that is? Natalie wanted to stay angry, but she could hear the honesty in his voice. It still feels like you were hiding something important. I was going to tell you, Dominic said. I was just trying to find the right moment. I wanted you to know me first. Dominic, who loves art and thinks your stories about teaching are the best part of his day, before you knew about Dominic Vaughn, CEO. Those are the same person, are they? Dominic asked. Because right now you're looking at me differently. You noticed my suit. You're probably thinking about all the times I picked nice restaurants or how I seem to travel a lot. Before tonight, those were just details. Now they're evidence of wealth, and wealth changes everything. Natalie hated that he was right. She was seeing him differently. Every interaction they had had was being reframed through this new lens. I need some time to think, she said finally. Dominic nodded, standing up. I understand. But Natalie, everything I've felt, everything I've said to you, that's all real. The money doesn't change how much I care about you. After he left, Natalie sat in her apartment feeling confused and hurt. She thought about calling Maya, but knew what her friend would say, that she was crazy for being upset about dating a billionaire. But it wasn't about the money. It was about trust and honesty, and the fact that she had shared everything with him while he had held back something so fundamental. She spent the next 3 days avoiding Dominic's calls and texts. She needed space to figure out how she felt without his warm brown eyes and gentle voice influencing her. She threw herself into her teaching, spending extra time with her students and staying late to prepare elaborate art projects. On the 4th day, she received a package at the school. Inside was a small watercolor set, professional grade, the kind she had admired in art stores but could never justify buying. The note read, "For creating beautiful things in small spaces, I miss you." Natalie stared at the paint set, her eyes welling up. This was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that had made her fall for him in the first place. He remembered what she had told him about her cramped apartment studio. He knew what mattered to her. That evening, she finally called him back. "Can we talk?" "Anytime," Dominic replied immediately. They met at a small park near her apartment. The autumn air was crisp, and leaves crunched under their feet as they walked. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry," Dominic said finally. "I should have told you sooner. I let my past experiences with people only caring about my money make me too cautious. That wasn't fair to you." I'm sorry too, Natalie said. I overreacted. You were right that it would have changed things if you had told me immediately. I probably would have been too intimidated to really get to know you. So where does that leave us? Natalie stopped walking and turned to face him. It leaves us trying to be more honest. You need to trust me enough to share important things, even when they're complicated, and I need to not freak out when I learn something new about you. I can do that, Dominic said, hope lighting up his features. There's actually something I'd like to share with you if you're willing. Something I haven't shown many people. The next Saturday, Dominic picked her up in his car driven by himself this time, she noted. They drove out of the city, heading into the suburbs, and then further into an area with larger properties and more space between houses. Finally, he turned onto a long driveway that led to a beautiful modern house with floor-to-ceiling windows. "This is your house?" Natalie asked, taking in the stunning architecture. "This is my house," Dominic confirmed, "but that's not what I want to show you." He led her around the back, where a separate building stood a converted barn with the same modern aesthetic as the main house. When he opened the door, Natalie gasped. It was an art studio. Not a small corner with a makeshift easel like hers, but a real, professional studio with natural light streaming through skylights, organized supplies, and several easels holding works in progress. "You paint," Natalie said, walking slowly into the space. "I paint," Dominic confirmed. "Not well, but I paint. This is where I come when the business world gets to be too much, when I need to remember that there's more to life than profit margins and quarterly reports." Natalie moved to one of the easels, studying the oil painting there. It was a landscape, clearly still in progress, but the technique was solid. "Dominic, this is good, really good. You don't have to, I'm an art teacher. If it was bad, I'd tell you, this is good." She turned to look at him. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" "Because I was already hiding the CEO thing, and I didn't want to seem like I was trying to impress you by pretending we had even more in common." He ran a hand through his hair, looking vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "The truth is, art is deeply personal to me. My father thought it was a waste of time. He wanted me to focus entirely on the business. When he died and I took over, one of the first things I did was build this studio. It was my way of reclaiming a part of myself that he had tried to suppress." Natalie felt her heart soften completely. This was the real Dominic, standing in his private sanctuary, sharing something he kept hidden from the world. "Can I see more?" They spent the next 2 hours going through his paintings. Dominic had been working on a series exploring light and shadow in urban landscapes. They were thoughtful pieces that showed real observation and skill. Natalie gave him feedback the same way she would any artist, and Dominic listened carefully, asking questions and discussing technique. "You should show these," Natalie said finally. Dominic laughed. "Right, can you imagine? Billionaire CEO thinks he's an artist. The business press would have a field day. Who cares what they think? These are good, Dominic. They deserve to be seen." Something in his expression shifted. "Maybe someday. For now, I'm happy just sharing them with you." As fall turned to winter, Natalie and Dominic fell into a comfortable rhythm. She met more of his world attending a charity gala where she wore a dress he had insisted on buying her after she had a minor panic attack about not having anything appropriate to wear. She met his business associates and learned to navigate the complicated social dynamics of the ultra-wealthy. It was sometimes overwhelming, but Dominic was always there, his hand warm on her back, grounding her. He became part of her world too. He attended the school's winter art show, where he spent an hour seriously discussing technique with a precocious 9-year-old who wanted to know why rich people liked paintings with just squares. He had dinner with Maya and Natalie's other friends at cheap restaurants where the wine came in glasses that didn't match. He helped Natalie set up supplies for her classes and never once made her feel like her work was less important than his. The first time Natalie said, "I love you," they were in his studio. It was a Sunday afternoon, and she was working on a watercolor while he painted at his easel. Snow fell softly outside the windows, and classical music played from speakers she couldn't see. It was peaceful and perfect, and the words just slipped out. "I love you." Dominic's brush froze mid-stroke. He turned slowly to look at her, paint forgotten. "What did you say?" Natalie set down her brush, suddenly nervous. "I said I love you." "I know it's only been 4 months and maybe that's too fast, but Dominic closed the distance between them in 3 long strides and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of everything words couldn't express. When he pulled back, he was grinning. "I love you too. I've wanted to say it for weeks, but I didn't want to scare you away." "You're not getting rid of me that easily," Natalie said, laughing. Christmas was magical. Dominic surprised her with a trip to Paris, where they spent a week visiting every museum and gallery they could find. He had arranged for a private tour of the Louvre early one morning before it opened to the public, and they wandered through the empty halls holding hands, marveling at the art. "This is the best gift anyone has ever given me," Natalie said as they stood before the Mona Lisa, alone in the gallery. "You're the best gift I've ever received," Dominic replied, and she believed him. In the spring, Dominic did something unexpected. He announced that Vaughn Industrial would be launching an arts education initiative, partnering with schools in underserved communities to fund art programs and supplies. When the press asked what inspired the program, he credited Natalie not by name at her request, but calling her an extraordinary teacher who reminded me why art matters. The program was a massive success, and Natalie found herself consulting on the curriculum and teacher resources. It felt surreal to see her ideas being implemented in schools across the country, funded by Dominic's fortune, but shaped by her experience and passion. One evening in May, as they walked through the Contemporary Art Museum where they had first met, Dominic stopped in front of the same red and gold painting that had started their first conversation. "Remember what you said about this painting?" he asked. "About grief transforming into hope." "I remember," Natalie said, studying the familiar swirls of color. "That's what you did for me," Dominic said quietly. "Before I met you, I was going through the motions, running the company, doing what was expected but not really living. You reminded me what it feels like to be passionate about something, to create, to hope for more than just the next quarterly earnings report." Natalie turned to look at him and found him down on one knee, holding a small velvet box. "Natalie Lancaster, I love you more than I thought I could love anyone. You see me not the CEO, not the money, just me. You make me want to be better, to create more, to build a life full of beauty and meaning. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful as sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that caught the gallery lights, but Natalie barely saw it. She was focused on Dominic's face, on the vulnerability and love in his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice catching. "Yes, absolutely yes." When he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, someone started clapping. Natalie looked around to see that several other museum visitors had stopped to watch, and now they were applauding and cheering. She laughed, burying her face in Dominic's shoulder as he held her tight. They were married that September in a ceremony that bridged both their worlds. The venue was an art gallery they had rented for the evening, with paintings and sculptures creating an intimate atmosphere. Maya was Natalie's maid of honor, and she cried through the entire ceremony. Dominic's business partner served as best man, giving a surprisingly heartfelt speech about how Natalie had brought light into Dominic's life. But Natalie's favorite part was the vows. Dominic promised to always make time for art, for beauty, for the things that mattered beyond business. She promised to push him to share his paintings with the world, and to never let him forget that his worth wasn't tied to his company's success. The reception featured student artwork from Natalie's school alongside pieces from established artists, a detail that made Natalie tear up when she saw it. Dominic had insisted on it, saying that all artists deserved to be celebrated. For their honeymoon, they rented a villa in Tuscany with a studio space. They spent 2 weeks painting, exploring local galleries, and eating amazing food. It was simple and perfect, and Natalie felt more content than she ever had in her life. When they returned to Chicago, Natalie was surprised to find that Dominic had renovated part of their home he had moved into his house before the wedding to include a shared studio space. One side was set up for his oil paintings, the other for her watercolors, with a shared area in the middle where they could work together. "I know you loved your apartment," Dominic said, watching her reaction nervously, "but I thought maybe we could create something even better together." "It's perfect," Natalie said, spinning to kiss him. "Absolutely perfect." A year into their marriage, Dominic did something that shocked everyone in his business circles. He announced that he was stepping back from day-to-day operations at Vaughn Industrial to focus on the company's philanthropic initiatives, particularly the arts education program. He would remain chairman of the board, but he was promoting his second-in-command to CEO. "Are you sure about this?" Natalie asked when he told her his plans. "Your father built this company. I don't want you to have regrets." "My father built the company," Dominic agreed, "but I've spent the last 6 years growing it into something that can run without me being there 18 hours a day. And I realized that I don't want to spend the rest of my life in board meetings when I could be creating things, teaching, making a difference in the way you do every day." "What will you do?" Dominic pulled her close. "I'm going to paint. I'm going to work with the arts education program. And I'm going to spend a lot more time with my wife, maybe start thinking about expanding our family someday soon." Natalie felt her heart skip. They had talked about having children, but carefully, both wanting to make sure they were ready. "Someday soon, if you want," Dominic said softly. "No pressure, but yes, I want that. With you." 2 years after their wedding, Natalie gave birth to a daughter they named Deanna. She had Dominic's dark hair and Natalie's green eyes, and from the moment she could hold a crayon, it was clear she had inherited her parents' love of art. Their house was covered in her drawings, which Dominic insisted on displaying as proudly as any masterpiece. When Deanna was 2, Dominic finally agreed to show his paintings publicly. It was a small show at a local gallery, and he insisted on being listed simply as D. Vaughn, without mention of his business background. The paintings sold well, and the reviews were positive. More importantly, Dominic looked happier than Natalie had ever seen him at the opening, discussing his work with genuine enthusiasm. Natalie had cut back to teaching part-time so she could spend more time with Deanna and continue consulting on the Arts Education Initiative, which had now expanded to include music and theater programs. She found that she loved the balanced time with her daughter, time teaching, time creating her own art, and time working on a program that was changing lives. On their 5th anniversary, they returned to the Contemporary Art Museum where they had met. Deanna toddled between them, her small hands gripping each of their fingers. They stood in front of the red and gold painting, the same one where they had first connected. "Still see grief transforming into hope?" Dominic asked, echoing their first conversation. Natalie looked at the painting, then at her husband, then down at their daughter who was babbling cheerfully about the pretty colors. She thought about the art teacher who had been so out of place at a fancy museum opening 5 years ago, and the CEO who had been hiding his true self behind business suits and carefully vague descriptions of his work. She thought about how they had both been transformed by love, how they had built a life full of color and meaning and joy. "I see more than that now," Natalie said. "I see 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment. I see a future full of possibility." Dominic leaned down to kiss her softly. "I see the same thing, every single day." Deanna tugged on their hands, eager to see more paintings, and they let her lead them through the gallery. As they walked, Natalie reflected on how unlikely their story was, how a chance conversation about art had led to everything she had now. She thought about the man who had asked her out at a museum opening, never expecting that the art lover would love him back for who he really was, not what he was worth. But she had loved him. She loved him still. And she would love him for all the years to come, through every painting and every moment, through the chaos and beauty of the life they were creating together. It was a masterpiece in progress, and Natalie couldn't wait to see how it continued to unfold.